I trusted my son with everything I had, and the very next morning he threw me away like an old coat left on a park bench. I'm 72 years old. My name is Thomas Miller, and I've worked my whole life believing sacrifice meant something. I welded steel in Pittsburgh for 40 years, through winters so cold the rivers froze solid, and summers so hot the sparks from my torch felt like fire ants crawling under my shirt. I thought all that sweat and pain built something worth passing on. I spent decades saving, not for vacations or shiny trucks, but for one thing: security. The house on Shadyside Avenue, built from solid redwood beams back in the 70s, worth close to $850,000 now, plus the 600 grand in retirement funds I kept untouched, even when times got tight. I told myself it was for David, my only boy. His mother, God rest her soul, always said, "Tom, one day that house will be his start in life." So when David asked me to finalize the inheritance early, I didn't hesitate. He stood there in my kitchen, tall, clean cut, smelling of cologne I couldn't afford, telling me, "Dad, if you sign now, it'll help me settle things. You'll never have to worry again." His words sank deep, because all I wanted was peace in my last years. That night, I signed the papers. My hand shook a little, but I trusted him. He even poured me a glass of warm milk, said it would help me sleep. Funny thing, though, the milk tasted bitter, like there was something mixed in. I told myself I was imagining it. I didn't want to think my own son would drug his father just to get a signature. But that taste, it stayed on my tongue longer than it should have. The next morning, he showed up with a brand new Lincoln Navigator, polished so bright it caught the sun like a mirror. I thought he was taking me to breakfast. Instead, he drove me 30 minutes out of town to a place called Maple Grove Nursing Home, the kind of facility that smells of bleach and loneliness the moment you step through the door. He parked, helped me out, and handed my suitcase, already packed, though I hadn't packed it myself. That detail nagged me. He looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, this is best for you. I'm too busy with work, but here they'll take care of you." His voice was steady, but I caught the flicker of relief, like a man unloading a burden. The staff greeted me with paperwork already prepared. My name was on the files, my insurance details neatly printed, as if they'd been expecting me. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a sudden decision. David had planned it. While I was still holding the pen the night before, he was already arranging my exile. I wanted to scream, but my throat closed up. I signed again, this time not out of trust, but out of shock. The nurse wheeled me inside, past rooms filled with people staring blankly at television screens, their lives reduced to bingo cards and pills in plastic cups. From the window of my new room, I could still see the city skyline, my city, my life. And just beyond the rooftops, I imagined the house where I had lived for 47 years. I pictured David walking through its halls, his shoes clicking on the hardwood floors his mother polished every spring. That night, I couldn't sleep. I thought of the bitter milk, the suitcase already packed, the way his hand trembled when I signed the documents, details that didn't add up. My heart told me I had been tricked, but my mind wanted to believe it was just my son trying to care for me in his own way. Then, just before midnight, I heard him outside my window. He was on the phone, his voice sharp, impatient. "Yeah, we'll list it at 1.2 million. It's prime property. Should move fast." My chest tightened. He wasn't talking about stocks or some other deal. He was talking about my house, the one he swore would stay in the family. I pressed my forehead against the glass, cold and unforgiving, as his laughter drifted up into the night. My son had betrayed me in less than 24 hours, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't just sit here and rot away. I woke up the next morning to the sound of footsteps in the hallway, nurses wheeling carts of pills clattering against the walls. My body felt heavy, not from age, but from the weight of what I'd overheard the night before. My son wasn't planning to take care of me. He was planning to sell me off piece by piece, starting with the house his mother and I built, brick by brick. Breakfast was watery oatmeal and a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. I stared at the plastic tray, my hands shaking, not from Parkinson's or anything medical, but from anger. I had lived 72 years, survived strikes at the steel plant, buried my wife after her long fight with cancer, and this was what I was reduced to, a man waiting for pills and a bed alarm. But the thing that stuck in my head wasn't the betrayal alone. It was that bitter taste in the glass of milk he'd given me the night I signed the papers. I couldn't shake it. Did he drug me? Was I even of sound mind when I gave him everything? People debate these things all the time. Some say you should have read the fine print. Others say family should protect family. But where does it fall when the person betraying you is your own child? That afternoon, I wandered into the recreation room. A TV blared one of those local real estate ads. My stomach twisted when I saw it. My house, my porch swing, my wife's rose bushes, historic redwood construction, market price, $1.2 million. Call. Now, the number listed was David's. It felt like someone had driven a steel rod through my chest. He didn't waste a week. He didn't even waste a day. The house wasn't just property. It was 47 years of memories, a place where birthdays were celebrated, where my wife's laughter filled every corner, where I taught David how to ride his first bike, and he turned it into a listing on a screen. That night, I sat by the window again, waiting. Sure enough, David pulled up in that Navigator, still shining like a trophy he hadn't earned. I cracked the window and heard him talking on the phone. Yeah, already listed. We'll push the open house for next weekend. I've got a buyer from Chicago lined up. Don't worry, the old man's tucked away. He won't be a problem. The old man, that's what I had become to him. Not Dad, not Thomas. Just the old man. I clenched my fists so tight my nails cut into my palms. But then another thought struck me, quieter but sharper. If he was already arranging buyers, maybe, just maybe, he had done this before. Maybe he'd been planning it long before my signature hit the page. That bitter milk, the suitcase already packed, the staff expecting me. None of that happened overnight. The next morning I asked the nurse for the newspaper. Buried on page 12, under the real estate section, was a little legal notice. Notice of property transfer, Thomas Miller to David Miller. My name, stripped down to a line of text, announcing to the world that I'd given up everything. But something was off. I stared at the scanned signature at the bottom. The loop in the T didn't look like mine. My hand had trembled, yes, but I had never in 70 years written my name that way. That's when I realized it wasn't just betrayal. It was forgery. I pressed the paper against my chest and laughed, a dry, bitter sound that startled the woman sitting next to me. She asked what was so funny, and I told her, "My son thinks he's clever. But he left fingerprints on his crime, I knew. Then I couldn't just sit here waiting to die. My wife always said I was stubborn as a mule. Maybe that stubbornness was the one thing I had left. And if my son thought I was too old, too tired, too weak to fight back, he was about to learn the biggest lesson of his life. Because I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. When I saw that forged signature in the paper, something inside me snapped. The heartbreak of losing my son to greed shifted into something else. Clarity. I wasn't just an old man discarded in a nursing home. I was still Thomas Miller, a man who had survived strikes, recessions, and bearing the love of my life. If I could get through all that, I sure as hell could fight my own flesh and blood. I started small. You'd be surprised how much people talk when they think an old man isn't listening. Nurses chatted in the hall about David's fancy parties. Neighbors called the front desk asking if I was okay. And one aide, barely 20, let slip that my son had stopped by to drop off more documents. Documents I never saw. That detail gnawed at me. What else had he filed under my name? The suitcase already packed. The milk with that bitter taste. The staff ready with my insurance info. It all lined up into something uglier than I wanted to admit. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had plotted every step like a chess game, moving pieces while I was still clinging to trust. I needed proof. That's when I thought of Margaret. She'd been our neighbor for over 30 years, the kind of woman who still baked apple pies for 4th of July and shoveled snow for anyone too old to manage. She still had a spare key to the house, my house. I asked the nurse if I could make a call. She hesitated, then handed me the phone. When Margaret's voice came on, warm and familiar, I nearly broke down. "Thomas," she said. I was worried sick. "Your boy's been parading people through your living room. Realtors, strangers, even some banker in a slick suit. It doesn't feel right." I closed my eyes and let her words burn into me. So it was true. David wasn't just thinking about selling, he was already courting buyers. But Margaret added something that made my blood run cold. "Last week," she whispered, "I saw him in your study. He had boxes of your old files out, flipping through. I thought he was organizing, but then I noticed your wife's letters, the ones she left for you, weren't there anymore." My chest tightened. Those letters weren't just paper. They were my wife's final words, her promises, her love, her instructions to keep the family together. And now they were gone, swallowed by my son's scheme. That night, lying in the stiff nursing home bed, I remembered something I'd almost forgotten. Years ago, before she passed, my wife recorded a video on a little USB stick. She told me, "If the day ever comes when our boy forgets who he is, you show this to him. And if he still won't listen, you show it to the world." I had hidden it in a small cedar box in the attic. If David had ransacked the study, maybe he overlooked it, or maybe he found it and didn't realize what it was. Either way, that USB was now the key, not just to my memories, but to my defense. I knew I couldn't get it alone. So I called in a favor from the only man I trusted outside of Margaret, George, my old friend from the steel plant. He had retired as a police detective, and he still had the instincts. When I told him what happened, he didn't say, "I told you so." He just said, "I'll dig." A week later, George came to see me. He leaned close, his voice low. "Tom, your son filed a power of attorney behind your back. It's how he pushed the house listing through so fast. But there's a catch. The paperwork doesn't match your actual medical records. If you were drugged, even lightly when you signed, it's fraud." Fraud. The word tasted sharp, metallic, like blood in my mouth. My own son had committed a crime against me, not just a betrayal. George handed me a manila folder. Inside were copies of emails between David and a real estate agent. In one, David bragged, "Don't worry, the old man can't interfere." He's out of the picture for good. I stared at those words until the letters blurred. Out of the picture for good. My son had written me off like a used car. But here's the twist. The deal wasn't closed yet. David had borrowed $250,000 from a bank as a down payment for another property, using my house as leverage. If the sale fell through, he'd be in over his head, drowning in debt. For the first time since this nightmare began, I smiled. He had dug his own trap, and I had the chance to spring it shut. The only problem? That USB with my wife's video. Without it, my case was weaker. With it, I could burn his whole scheme to the ground. I told Margaret over the phone, "We need to get into that attic." She hesitated. "Thomas, if he catches me, he'll know you're fighting back." I gripped the receiver, my knuckles white. "Good," I said. "Let him know." Because in that moment, I realized the heartbreak he caused me wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my revenge. I hadn't felt adrenaline like that since I was a young man walking into the steel plant for my first union strike. My body was older now, my bones stiff, but my mind had never been sharper. David thought he'd buried me in that nursing home, that I'd fade into pills and bingo cards, but he had no idea I was clawing my way back, one piece of evidence at a time. George and I sat together in the visiting lounge. The stale smell of disinfectant thick in the air. He slid another folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, bold numbers staring back at me. My son had already taken out a massive loan, $250,000, using my house as collateral. He was gambling with everything I had built. "Tom," George said, voice low and steady, "if the house sale collapses, he's finished. Bankrupt before 40. You want justice? This is where you push." My heart pounded. There it was, the crack in David's armor. He thought he had power of attorney locked up, but the foundation of his scheme was built on a lie. If I pulled the right thread, it would all unravel. The problem was the proof. Without the USB my wife had recorded, the case could be dismissed as just an old man regretting his signature. I needed that recording. It wasn't just her voice. It was her will, her soul poured into one last warning. So I called Margaret. "We're going into the attic tonight," I told her. My voice shook, but not with fear, with rage held on a leash. That evening, Margaret slipped into the house under the excuse of watering the plants. She carried her phone on speaker so I could hear every creak of the old floorboards, every nervous breath. I sat in my room at Maple Grove, gripping the receiver so hard I thought the plastic would crack. Then her whisper, "I'm in. The cedar box is here." I closed my eyes, picturing the box. Dark wood, carved edges, the one my wife had given me on our 20th anniversary. My chest ached just hearing it described. But before she could open it, I heard another sound. A door slamming, David's voice, sharp as broken glass. "What the hell are you doing here, Margaret?" My blood ran cold. I was just checking the plants," she stammered. "Don't lie to me." "You were in the attic." I could hear the shuffle, the box being snatched away. Margaret's panicked breaths. Then the line went dead. I sat in silence, the hum of the nursing home fluorescent lights buzzing in my ears. My son had caught her red-handed, and now he had the box. The next day, George came with news that twisted the knife deeper. "Tom, your boy withdrew $50,000 from the loan. He's burning through the cash already. But here's the kicker. He bragged at a bar last night that he found something in the attic that would bury any challenge. The USB. He had it. And instead of fearing what was on it, he thought it was leverage against me." That night, lying in bed, I thought about my wife's words, her steady voice when she told me, "If he ever loses his way, remind him of who he is." Maybe she had meant the recording as a lifeline, a way to pull him back. But I knew better now. David didn't want saving. He wanted control. And control only ended when someone stronger took it back. The following morning, I demanded to see a lawyer. The nurse hesitated, but George had already lined it up. By afternoon, I was sitting in front of an attorney in a cramped office that smelled of old coffee and legal pads. I laid out everything, the bitter milk, the forged signature, the loan, the missing letters, the USB. The lawyer tapped his pen, thoughtful. "If the video says what you claim, it could override the power of attorney. But if he's holding it, we'll need a court order to seize it. Until then, your son has the upper hand, upper hand." The phrase stung, but it also lit something inside me. I had lived my whole life letting others tell me when I was strong enough, when I had a say. Not anymore. 2 days later, George called with the break I'd been praying for. "Tom, the open house is set for Saturday morning. Your son's inviting buyers. If we act now, we can get the court involved before he signs a deal." My pulse hammered in my ears. This was it, the moment to strike. But just when I thought I had a plan, fate twisted the knife one more time. That evening, a nurse rushed into my room holding an envelope. "This just came for you, Mr. Miller." Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in bold. "Stay out of my way, old man. If you fight me, you'll lose more than the house." No signature, but I knew the hand behind it. My son had declared war. The letter shook me more than I wanted to admit. "Stay out of my way, old man." Those words weren't just a threat. They were my son spitting in my face one final time. But instead of breaking me, it hardened something inside. He thought fear would silence me. He forgot I was forged in fire long before he was born. Saturday came like a storm. The open house was scheduled for 10 in the morning. Sleek cars lined the curb in front of my house. Men in tailored suits, women in heels. Sipping free champagne, David had set out like he was already a millionaire. From my seat inside the courthouse downtown, I watched the clock tick toward 10. At 9:45, the judge entered. My lawyer, steady as a stone, presented the petition. David's power of attorney was fraudulent, signed under duress. George testified about the bitter milk, the forged signatures. Margaret, shaking but resolute, admitted she saw David rifling through my personal belongings. And then came the twist that silenced the whole room. The bailiff wheeled in a small evidence cart with the cedar box on top. David had kept it hidden, thinking it was leverage. But the police, armed with the court order, had seized it from his office just hours before. Inside was the USB, still labeled in my wife's handwriting, for Richard only. The judge ordered it played. My wife's face filled the courtroom screen, her voice soft but firm. If this house is ever in danger of leaving the family, I want it known. My wish is that it stays with our bloodline, not sold for greed. Thomas, protect it. Protect us. Her words struck like hammers. Even the buyers, shifting in their seats, looked away, ashamed. My son sat frozen, pale as chalk, as the judge's gavel came down. The ruling was swift. The power of attorney was void. The property sale was halted. And David, caught in lies and forged documents, was charged with fraud. His bank loan collapsed overnight. The same house he tried to sell became the anchor that dragged him under. When the judgment was read, he turned to me, eyes wide, searching for mercy, but I had none left to give. "You buried yourself," I whispered, just loud enough for him to hear. Weeks later, I sat again on my porch, the same swing I'd built with my own hands. The roses my wife planted swayed gently in the autumn breeze. I was home, not because of the walls or the deed, but because justice had been done. My son had lost the very thing he thought he owned, control, and I had gained back the one thing he tried to strip from me, dignity. I've learned something hard in all this. Blood doesn't always mean loyalty. Sometimes the people you die for are the first to bury you. But no matter how late it comes, truth still has a way of finding light. Have you ever been betrayed by the very person you trusted most? Share your story in the comments. I'd like to hear it. And if this story meant something to you, stay with me for more. We're not done telling the truths that hurt and the revenges that heal.